We're almost at the end of October, and we'll have our first college football rankings in just a couple of weeks. Although the final playoff rankings are still over a month away, here's how the 12-team college football playoff would look if the season were to end today. Before we get to today's video, make sure to hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to my channel. If you're watching this video, odds are you love college football, and odds are you aren't subscribed to my channel. So make sure to subscribe to one of the best college football communities here on YouTube. In case you needed a quick reminder on how the new format works, the 4 highest ranked conference champions will receive a first round bye. Then the highest ranked group of 5 champion will earn a spot as well. After that, the next 7 highest ranked teams would get in. Alright, hopefully all that makes sense, so let's get to the teams that would be in. As always, we're going to be looking at this based on the current AP poll standings since we don't have college football playoff rankings just yet. And I know the teams that are going to get the byes are going to be the teams that win their conference championship, so those might not be the teams we talk about today, but for the sake of this video, we're going to assume the highest ranked teams are going to be the ones that win their conference championship. Kicking things off this week, we have Oregon at number 1, as they're currently the highest ranked Big Ten team. Coming in at number 2 is Georgia, who is the highest ranked SEC team. Number 3 goes to Miami, who is the highest ranked ACC team, and coming in at number 4, we have Iowa State, who is the highest ranked Big 12 team. Looking at the teams now, we have ranked 5 through 12. Penn State comes in at 5, Ohio State comes in at 6, Texas comes in at 7, Tennessee comes in at 8, LSU comes in at 9, Clemson comes in at 10, BYU comes in at 11, and rounding out the top 12 is Boise State. Now, Boise State is really going to make things interesting. As I've talked about in previous videos, whoever that group of 5 championship team is, they're going to get the 12th and final spot. But if they do finish ranked inside the top 12, they'll be ranked wherever they finish. So if Boise State continues to win and they finish the season ranked 9th, well, they would be the number 9 ranked team, not the number 12 ranked team like they currently would be. Up next, we'll look at our first 4 out, and things have drastically changed since we did this a couple weeks ago. We have Notre Dame, Indiana, Texas A&M, and Alabama. We'll look at our next 4 out, that includes Kansas State, Ole Miss, Pittsburgh, and Illinois. Up next, we have our first 4 group of 5 teams out, including Army, Navy, UNLV, and Liberty. As things currently stand right now, the matchups in the first round would be Penn State hosting Boise State, Ohio State hosting BYU, Texas hosting Clemson, and Tennessee hosting LSU. Again, there's a lot that can change in the next 5 to 6 weeks of the college football season. I mean, just think about the last video I did on this a couple weeks ago. A lot of these teams that we talked about weren't even mentioned in this. I mean, you have all these different teams that are still alive in the playoff hunt as we get ready to wrap up October. Now, we're going to do something different that I haven't done in previous videos, but since we're getting close to the end of the season, I thought I would take a look at the remaining schedule for the 12 teams that are currently in the playoff discussion and what their chances are of finishing inside the top 12. We'll start with Oregon, who is currently undefeated, and they're tied with Indiana as their 4-0 in conference play. Looking at the remaining schedule, they do have a ranked game against Illinois this weekend, but outside of that, Oregon should be heavily favored in all of their remaining games. So barring an absolute collapse, I think at the very least, if Oregon doesn't get the bye by winning the Big Ten, they're certainly going to be in there as one of the 7 remaining teams. Georgia had a rough loss a couple weeks ago to Alabama, but they have one of the better resumes in all of college football as they have victories over Clemson and Texas, 2 teams that are currently top 10 teams. You look at the remaining schedule, they do have top 20 matchups against Ole Miss and Tennessee, so those could be really resume boosting victories. Considering Georgia's strong resume and they're already ranked so high, I do think they can afford another loss the rest of the way. Penn State is one of only 3 teams in the Big Ten that doesn't have a conference loss, so they're looking like a really strong possibility of playing in the Big Ten title game. You look at the schedule and you gotta circle that matchup against Ohio State in a couple weeks. If they're able to somehow pull off the victory against the Buckeyes, the rest of their schedule looks really winnable. Like I said with Oregon, if Penn State isn't playing in the Big Ten title game and doesn't get that bye, I definitely think they're probably going to be one of the last 7 teams in. It was a rough loss to Oregon a couple weeks ago, and as things currently stand, there are 5 teams ahead of Ohio State in the Big Ten standings, but the Buckeyes still control the rest of their destiny. When looking at the remaining schedule, they have a couple of really good chances of boosting their resume and really securing a playoff spot. They go on the road to number 3 Penn State next weekend, and in a couple weeks, they take on number 13 Indiana. For Ohio State, I think they can afford afford one loss, and it would take 2 losses to knock them out of the 12-team playoff. I talked about this in my top 25 video yesterday, but I really don't know what to make of Texas because when you look at their resume, it isn't all that impressive. At the time, they had a couple of top 20 victories, but those aren't looking like good victories anymore. They do go on the road to take on number 25 Vanderbilt this weekend, but is that really going to be a quality victory as well? Their best bet is going to be at the end of the season when they got to go on the road to take on number 14 Texas A&M. As of right now, there are 4 teams ahead of Texas in the SEC standings, so there's going to be a lot of ground they have to make up. I mean, if they don't even make it to the SEC title game and they have a loss against Georgia and potentially Texas A&M, 2 teams that are likely going to be top 10 to 15 teams, I don't think there's any way that Texas gets into the playoff. Miami is another team that has a really bad resume, and this one might be actually worse than Texas. As of right now, they don't have a top 25 victory, and I don't think they're going to have an opportunity for a top 25 victory the rest of the way. So for the Hurricanes, I think they got to win out, because if they have any sort of loss on this schedule, the committee's going to have a tough job putting a team like Miami in with a loss against one of these teams over some other teams that might have stronger resumes. When looking at Tennessee's schedule, they do have a nice victory against Alabama, but it looks like it's all going to come down to the results of that Georgia game. If Tennessee doesn't beat Georgia, I really don't understand how they're going to be able to get into the 12-team playoff, especially by not even making it to the SEC title game. LSU suffered a loss in week 1, but they've bounced back nicely as they've won 6 consecutive games. Their schedule the next couple of weeks is pretty brutal as they got to go on the road to Texas A&M, and then they got to take on Alabama. As things currently stand, LSU is second in the SEC as they're 3-0 in conference play, and they're one of only 2 teams that doesn't have a conference loss just yet. They probably can afford one loss in the next 2 weeks, but I don't think they can lose to A&M and Alabama and still make the playoff. After starting the season with an embarrassing loss, Clemson has won 6 consecutive games, and when looking at their remaining schedule, they're probably going to be in the driver's seat as well. Their most difficult matchup comes on the road at number 19 Pittsburgh, but that should be a game that Clemson is favored in and a game that they should win. When looking at their schedule though, they're not really going to have any quality victories either unless it's against Pittsburgh or if they beat Miami in the ACC title game. I think Clemson's best bet to reach in the playoff is winning out and then losing to an undefeated Miami team in the ACC title game. Iowa State is currently one of 2 Big 12 teams that is 7-0 and 4-0 in conference play. When looking at their resume so far, it's not all that impressive, as their best win, I guess, comes on the road by 1 point against Iowa. When looking at their remaining schedule, it's not all that enticing as well until the final week of the season when they host number 16 Kansas State. I definitely think Iowa State is going to be able to win out at least until that final matchup, but that game against Kansas State could determine who gets a spot in the Big 12 title game. If they lose to Kansas State, the Wildcats will have the tiebreaker and they'll get in the Big 12 title game, knocking out Iowa State. If that's the case, it might be Kansas State versus BYU in that Big 12 title game, and I'm not sure if the Big 12 is going to have 3 teams reach the college football playoff. So for the Cyclones, they just got to win out, and they got to beat Kansas State at the end of the season. Speaking of undefeated Big 12 teams, we have BYU, who does have a better resume than Iowa State. That's because they've already beaten Kansas State 38-9. Considering BYU's remaining schedule, barring an absolute collapse, it looks like they have a spot in the Big 12 title game all but secured. They already have the tiebreaker over Kansas State, and they don't have to worry about playing Iowa State. They're likely going to be favored in all these remaining games, so if BYU is able to win these next 5 games, it doesn't matter what happens in the Big 12 title game, they're still probably going to secure a spot in the playoff. The final team we're going to look at is Boise State, who is currently the best group of 5 team. When looking at their resume, they don't really have any impressive victories. I guess probably Washington State is their best, but they did lose to Oregon on the road by only 3 points, and despite that being a loss, that's a pretty strong resume booster considering they're the number 1 team in the country right now. When looking at this remaining schedule, their toughest remaining test is going to be this weekend actually, as they go on the road to take on UNLV. If they're able to win that game, I think Boise State is going to win out, and I think they're probably going to be the group of 5 representative in the college football playoff. But if the Broncos lose this weekend, or if they lose any of these other games, I wouldn't be surprised if that ends their chances. Well, that wraps it up for today's look at the 12-team playoff. What are your thoughts on how things are currently looking as we get ready to enter November? How many teams inside today's top 12 do you think are going to be there at the end? And how many teams do you think are going to ultimately fall out? Also, is there a team that's not ranked inside the top 15 that you think is a long shot of reaching the college football playoff? Whoever it is, let me know in the comment section down below. Before you leave, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on those notifications if you're new to my channel. I'm posting college football videos all season long, so make sure to subscribe so you never miss a video. Also, don't forget to drop a like on this video as well. It helps out with that YouTube algorithm, and it helps share this video and my channel with more college football fans. Plus, it only takes a second to do. As always, thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you all in my next video.